One item that our public affairs folks really want us to share and asked me to share with this group today is our strategy. And it starts with safety, and that's what a great place for us to start today, right? Our discussions about safety. But our entire strategy, starting with safety, rolls into service, and that is delivering the service we sold our customers, giving them the cars we said we would give them on time in the condition they asked for them, and pulling on time. Asset utilization, the drive decision making to those closest to the work. About a year ago, the Union Pacific went through a reorg, and I'll tell you, at first it was a little uncomfortable, but when you realize that layers of red tape and bureaucracy slow down decision making, which then in turn slows down getting customers freight to destination, and then you see what removing some of those layers does to speed up and make us more efficient. It was a great decision by the Union Pacific. Cost control, spend resources wisely with a buffer for the unexpected. All those locomotives that you saw me talk about earlier, we have extras and they're everywhere. We have perfectly good locomotives ready to go at a moment's notice throughout our network, just in case we have weather issues, a surge in business, or what have you. And finally, and probably most important, next to safety, is engaging our teams and stakeholders. Not so well done in decades past, but as we'll get into these slides, we'll talk about some of the engagement Union Pacific has done with our employees that we've never done before. So let's get into some railroad safety. If you've been watching the news the last couple of years, I don't think you could watch 30 minutes worth of any local news program or national news program where you wouldn't hear about a train derailment or some sort of egregious train activity. And a lot of that started after that East Palestine derailment there in Ohio. And I don't think there's anyone on this meeting who wasn't aware of that derailment. By the way, that were the black and white locomotives, not the yellow ones, that had that derailment. But if I quiz this group, and typically when I'm in a group setting, I'll ask for a show of hands. Can't do that here, but just think to yourself, based on everything you've heard over the last few years, is the railroad industry better or worse with derailments? Well, I know what the media would like you to believe, but the fact of the matter is that the entire industry is better than it has ever been. And I'm going to repeat that. The railroad industry has fewer derailments now than they have ever had. And obviously that's normalized for back in the early 1900s and freight volumes. But we're doing very well. And as a matter of fact, the Union Pacific broke a record in 2024 for a record low number of reportable FRA reportable derailments, and our best overall improvement in 1 year by 20%. So fantastic work. And that's if you look at the graph there, the middle right, that's every department. That's human factor. That's how our agreement professionals, engineers, and conductors are handling their trains. That's the engineering department that lays the rail and maintenances it. That's our mechanical department that maintains the cars, the fleet, and the locomotives, and even those miscellaneous weather events, tornadoes, floods, etc., snowstorms. It just hasn't been any better than it was in 2024. And I'm Catholic Irish, a little superstitious, so I'll knock on wood, but with 2 months or 3 months already in 2025, I can tell you we're on our way to beating that. Okay, so how did we achieve these wonderful record derailment measures here? Well, first of all, detectors was the first move we made. And this was driven out of the NS East Palestine derailment. For those of you who aren't real hip to the railroad industry and understand it quite to a layman's level, throughout our railroad and all class ones, we have these detectors on the track. And every time a train goes over it, these detectors are looking for dragging equipment and overheating bearings and journals. They're looking at every car and every axle, every train. And as soon as it detects something, be it dragging equipment or in the case of the NS Palestine derailment, an overheated journal, it sends an alarm to that crew's radio immediately. Then it tells them exactly which axle it's found to be overheating. And our temperature settings here before the East Palestine derailment were pretty low, hence us not having those type of derailments. But hey, you're never good enough, right? And so after that, we actually lowered the temperature on all of our detectors, thousands of them, spaced few miles apart throughout the network, another 10 degrees. And we're just as good as we ever were. We're catching a few more. We were probably good enough with our detectors. We weren't going to have a derailment anyway. But what the lowering of the detector temperatures did was alert us to trends where we could set out cars well in advance so they could be fixed before they even became a risk. The next thing we did was mainline track inspection twice each week. So every main line, and think of your main lines are those high-speed tracks that have typically the flashing gates and crossings, not where we build trains. So every main track on our network gets a track inspector over it twice a week. And a track inspector, I'm sure many of you have been sitting in a crossing and the gates have gone down and you're waiting for a train, but rather than a train, it's a gentleman or two in a pickup truck that go by you. Those are track inspectors. Those are highly trained individuals that are taught and trained to identify defects in the track, the ballast, the ties, the bridges, well in advance of an incident so that we can address them before a train goes over. Now, that's our main lines. In yard and industry tracks, right? So these are locations where we're just switching individual boxcars to build a train. We do that inspection monthly unless it's a critical lead. If it's a critical lead, it gets the same inspection as the main line. The definition of a critical lead is any lead that we will handle hazardous material on. We don't want a tank car full of TIH, toxic inhalation hazard, derailing in your town or neighborhood and having an incident with an evacuation. So we do those and treat those leads, even though the max speed's only 10 miles an hour, we treat them like a main line to ensure we're successful. In addition, our main lines get a geometry car twice per year, right? What's a geometry car? It's well, you'll see it here in the upper right, goes over the tracks and it's looking for curves that are out of line. It's looking for cross level, gauge, things of that nature that may put a train at risk. We also have a internal defect, a sonar down here in the bottom picture, at least twice per year. And these are looking for those things the naked eye just can't catch. And it's pretty much automatic. When it sees something, it spray paints a little part of that rail so that then one of those professionals, track inspectors we talked about earlier, can go over there, take a closer look, and we'll replace that rail. In addition to that, we do a lot of capital projects, ties, track, curves. If you look up here in the upper right, between 2013 and 2024, we spent over $34 billion on our track infrastructure and over $3 billion a year there for 22, 23, and 24. Think of that as maintenance for your vehicle, right? Before there's a problem, you take care of it. We will go replace entire curves on high-speed main line. That's probably perfectly good because data tells us, hey, here's the time frame we look for a curve like this in this location to begin to fail, and we will go ahead and replace those curves before there's a major issue. Okay, human factor. So these are some of the things we did for next few slides. How do we address our engineers and conductors, make them more successful for those human mistakes that cause derailments? Well, one of the simplest things we did was change out the switch targets on our network. And for those of you who've been up around the rail yard at all, switch target's kind of what you see pictured here. The problem was the Union Pacific is made up of about 10 different railroads that have merged over the years. You've got the MOP, the Katy or MKT, the CNW, the SP, the Rock Island, and I could go on. All have merged with the Union Pacific over the years. Each of them had their own switch target style. Some were round, some were red, some were yellow, some were rectangular, some were actually square. Some locations didn't even use them at all. And we would have our engineers and conductors move from one yard to the next off the main line and see completely different targets. And we realized pretty quickly that all those targets really didn't even tell you which direction you were supposed to go with those switches. So we had an initiative we put in here about a year and a half ago. It's just about done because you can imagine there's a lot of switches on our railroad. But it actually now tells our crews, hey, this is the direction your track is lined for. And it tells them if it's red and pointing the wrong way, hey, stop before you go through this switch. We don't want to have a derailment. So it's been a great initiative for us, and it's netted us at least 10 derailments less a year. Another thing we did was we took our training for our engineers conductors to a different level. So although these are just screenshots, envision your computer screen almost like a video game. And what happens here is you're shown a picture, the engineers and conductors, and eventually our managers. You get 50 different switches to look at from different directions, different weather conditions and lighting. And you have 3 seconds to tell the computer whether that switch is lined to the left, the right, or it's gapped. All right. And for those of you who don't have a lot of railroad experience, the gapped switch is one that's neither lined left or right, but is improperly for either a mechanical issue or mishandled by one of our conductors or switch folks. They've left it gapped on both sides, which will allow the locomotive or car wheels to fall inside the gauge of the rail. So imagine, if you will, there's 50 of these. You've got 3 seconds to either use your keyboard with arrows or mouse to select which direction that switch is lined. And I got asked before, David, why 3 seconds? Why would you hurry them? That doesn't sound right. Well, for those of you who've been around the railroad industry a lot, it probably does make sense. But for those of you who haven't, I'll kind of explain. We have people hanging on the side of box cars, shoving trains for several miles. And they're giving radio commands with one hand, holding on to the other, and they're standing in the stirrups with the ladder. And on our other than main track, they're good to move at 10 mph, which can be very quick when you come up on a switch. And even if you're a head end move in the cab of the locomotive at 10 mph, switches can actually be just a few feet apart. And you need to make quick decisions on whether to stop because it's gapped or lined the wrong way, or you're lined for the wrong route. So this has been a great initiative for us. This has also been about almost 2 years now in the making. We put all of our folks through it to include our managers, and we were giving it to them. This is switch assessment every year. And it doesn't matter if you're a seasoned employee. We were shocked at how many people with 20 and 30 years could not pass this test. And after 2 tries, if you couldn't pass it, you had to go talk to your manager. We need to find out, was it a vision issue? Did you have some sort of depth perception problem? And it was a real eye opener for us. And again, netted us quite a few derailment reductions in the last year or so. Another really simple idea we've taken on here over the last year and a half is changing out our clearance point markers. What you see here to the left is what is pretty standard in our industry and what we've had throughout. The upper left picture is a clearance point cone, and what we see most of the time, and that it's laying on the ground, it's faded and covered in ballast. What it should look like is the picture below. It's a small tube with the white and yellow on it. But if you have some rail experience, you can see that the placement of those is it's not in a good spot. Air hoses, the cow catcher, right? any lading that's dragging, chains, they're going to catch that cone and put it just like the picture in the upper left. And to be honest, they're really not all that visible. So we started the initiative you see to the right. We started painting the clearance points, ties yellow, and then we started ordering the reflectors that you see on the highways, and they're rubber with the highly reflective yellow tape, and they've been fantastic for us with marking our clearance points or our fouling points. And I think I just in case we have some folks without a lot of railroad knowledge, a fouling point is a location where two tracks come together, and at some point they get so close together before they actually join that one train and or car could not pass another safely. So we want those locomotives and cars to be on the safe side of that clearance point, and we mark those clearly as you see here. Another very simple idea, and I get full credit for this one. I started doing this in Kansas City about 15 years ago, and it wasn't until I got this job I was able to implement it network wide. But derails, fixed derails specifically. For those of you who are in the field or at your elevators, you've got derails, fixed derails at the entrance to your facility to protect you and us. You're real familiar with what I'm talking about. For those of you who aren't, I'll explain quickly. Oftentimes, it is better for us to derail a car or locomotive and put a couple wheels on the ground than that car or locomotive get past that derail location and harm somebody. So envision you've got some folks on top of some grain cars at an elevator, and this derail apparatus is not in place, and your crew comes in to couple in and we knock somebody off, heaven forbid. Or the other direction, your folks are moving some cars around with your movers or mules, and accidentally a car or cut of cars gets loose and heads to the main line. We would rather those cars just go ahead and derail, usually it's just the first one, and stop, than get on that main line and kill one of our train crews that come by. So what we did, and an audit, found this picture you see in the upper right. 99% of our derails look just like that. They blended in with the ties, the ballast around it, and even some of the foliage. And I'll argue that this is some of the better foliage. Usually they're covered in grass and weeds. And they weren't all that visible, and this is broad daylight. You can imagine how hard these would be to identify at night. So we started painting the derails high visibility yellow, same stuff you see on your parking lots and so on. But while that paint was wet, we sprinkled some number 4 glass beads you can get from any sandblasting or blasting company. And we lightly sprinkle that on that wet paint and leave it alone till it dries. And you would be shocked. I mean, this picture almost looks fake, and that's daylight. It illuminates so much. And when a lantern or locomotive or a flashlight hits that at night, it really shines and gives a great alert to our train crews. If I could ask anything of this group, if you have any responsibility over the derails in your territory, if you could pull off getting the fresh paint on those, and even better yet with the glass beads, you'd help both your teams and mine. Okay, this is one of the better departments we've put on here in the Union Pacific in the last few years. And someone, and I can't get credit for this, decided it might be a good idea to have the professionals that run trains and have been doing it for years help the other professionals that run trains have been doing it for years. So we invented this group called the Operating Practices Command Center, OPCC for short. It's a 24-hour resource for all employees and managers to receive immediate job-specific answers. I want to highlight the managers, right? A lot of our managers come from the college ranks, right? We hire them right out of school. And, they got a year or two out here and they don't quite know all the rules and regulations yet. These professionals who come right out of the craft can help them answer those questions. But so can our train crews. Now they can either pick up the telephone and call these folks 24/7, but federal regulation tells us that we can't use our cell phones on the train unless we're stopped and there's no safety sensitive activities going on. So we actually made it possible for these train crews to what we call dial up using their legal radio, this OPCC group, and they're able to communicate with them and say, hey, here's my problem, or here, do I take this signal, or I can't link up my DP. There's a million different things they help with. It's staffed by experienced DSLE managers. They're managers once we pull them out of the ranks. DSLE stands for Designated Supervisor of Locomotive Engineers. That's a federal term. And they've all got amazing backgrounds in operating and running trains. They are able to immediately download the locomotive and see if someone says they're having train handling problems. They can download the locomotive and see what's happening. Maybe some traction motors not loading, dynamic brakes not working like they should. Give that train crew advice on how to handle their train better. They can also retrieve video, and we're going to get into that more, inward and outward video to look along with the crew. They also complete all Class 1 annual monitoring events and recertifications. So the federal government says that we must do some sort of annual monitoring event of every locomotive engineer. So we need to make sure they can still proficiently run their train. This group does that by reading those downloads. And the federal government also says that every 3 years I must have a certification ride on every locomotive engineer. And this same group brings in every locomotive engineer into a simulator, and they spend all day with them doing their certification ride. In the event that an engineer is struggling and they have what's called a BIT, or a break-into, and I'll show you a picture of a knuckle later, but they break their train apart because they let too much slack or buff into the train, we'll bring that engineer in for some remedial training. We give them what's called a glass train. We give them a train that's probably bigger and harder to handle than anything they'll ever see on the network. And then we run them through what we call the gauntlet, a series of tasks to do with that train and situations. And we'll spend all day with them and make sure that their skills are honed. Grade UDE intervention for safe recovery. This is when we have a train either stall or have an emergency brake application on the side of a mountain. Before we have that crew do anything, we make sure they talk to these professionals to ensure that handbrakes are tied appropriately. We can recover that brake system safely so we don't have a rollaway. The last thing we want is a train coming down a mountain at 200 miles an hour and having a terrible derailment. And then finally, we're going to talk about this a lot more, PTB. It's called Physics Train Builder now. We recently changed the name. Analysis for Safe Train Handling. This group does that. And this is your Physics Train Builder. Now, this is the greatest technology in the railroad industry in my lifetime. And I'm a guy who saw DPs. I remember when my dad came home with his first radio, when the caboose went away and EOTs. And I'm here to tell you, this technology has made us, as part of the reason the railroad industry, specifically the Union Pacific, safer than ever. We own this program. It is for sale, although no other railroads have taken us up on the purchase price yet. But this technology, although it looks busy to you, I understand every bit of this. And although some of these graphs here on the left look like my heart when my youngest daughter told me she was moving to Tampa 2 weeks ago, I understand that those are braking algorithms, that those are buff and draft forces, and how a train was handled. We can see the in-train forces on every train in our network before it even departs the terminal. I'll get into that. Here's some of the features. Now, try and go through them quickly. We can vet existing train build rules. In other words, rules we've already had in place on how we want to build a train. I've got 100, 200 cars in this train. Where do we put the heavies? Where do we put the lighter cars? We can go back and see if we were right with those train builds, and we were not on a lot of them, and we changed them. Evaluate new business opportunities. Someone wants to move some ingots or steel coil across the network. We can see if it would be safe to do so. analyze transportation plans, what route a train may take safely, best locomotive configuration. If you've spent any time on the railroad or stopped at a crossing, we don't just have locomotives on the head end anymore. We have them in the head, the middle, the rear, and all over the place. And this technology tells us where that best place is. Test for safe motorists, safe, most efficient routes for trains, kind of touched on that already. Implement new train makeup restrictions to improve train build. Those are new train rules for new trains we put in the network. Weather. Trains really struggle in below zero temperatures, really cold temperatures. And our physics train builder will help us tell us where to put those locomotives to be most efficient. Again, that 24/7 operating practices team uses this tool to help us be successful. We can perform simulations on trains out of origin. And not only can we, but we do. No train on the Union Pacific departs the terminal until it has been run through Physics Train Builder and is deemed safe for its entire route, not to have a buff or draft force or lateral force derailment. Some of the features, easy to interpret and understand technical specifics and specifications. I know after the last slide, you're probably saying, you know, easy for you to say, David, but if you're in the business, believe me, it's pretty easy to understand. And then post-accident, if we do have a derailment, we can quickly see what the in-train forces dynamics were and drill down root cause quickly. Just real quickly here, for those of you who really don't have a ton of railroad understanding, when I talk about buff and draft forces, buff is when the slack comes in on a train, and draft is when it comes out. Buff is our biggest derailment risk. We can lift a wheel or a light car, and draft is typically when we have our knuckles break. So this is my favorite graph. The FRA hates it when I show it. They're going to get to see it here in a couple of weeks. But before this technology came on, it was about 2018 when it was in its infancy, and it is a learning algorithm, but this is not an incomplete graph. Our 2023 and 2024 derailments for buff, draft forces, train makeup are just that, 0. And although 10 derailments doesn't seem like a lot, these are our biggest derailments. Evacuate city derailments when we have these type. They're on the main line, they're at high speeds, lots of cars go down, and it's usually mixed manifest with hazmat. And we have literally taken those off the table. Okay, no safety discussion is complete without talking about employee injuries. And just like the derailments, we had a best ever 2024, 25% overall reduction from the year prior. And I'm telling you, our engagement is a large part of this. So what did we do to make this a safer place for our employees in 2024? Well, first of all, we started listening to our employees, and we opened up our safety hotlines and our communication avenues unlike we've never had before. We started listening to them. We brought them into safety meetings that we didn't have before and peer-to-peer meetings that we didn't have before. The next thing we did is we took all of our agreement employees in the entire railroad, took them off their job for the day, brought them for an 8-hour class with our safety specialists, rules experts, and they spent 8 hours, most of it, on just learning 12 rules. Now, we have thousands of rules and regulations, thousands here at the Union Pacific, and every railroad does. But we really realized, and you can see it here on the data, that the majority of our dismemberments, serious injuries, and unfortunate fatalities really came down to 12 rules or 6 actions. And so we spent the day with videos, right? We have a lot of drones here. We take a lot of drone video of people working, and we over and over again ingrained in them the importance of not going between equipment that's not separated properly or moving equipment that could put them in harm's way. Some of these, and if you're not real railroad savvy, won't mean a lot to you, but the 6 choices are here on the left. Lining routes, and that's that switch assessment that I showed you, right? Making sure your route's lined, maintaining a sufficient distance, not going around the end of equipment so close that if they were coupled into, you would be struck. Riding equipment. We unfortunately have people ride equipment into close clearance or ride the cars that are unsafe to ride. They fall off and get hurt. It happens way too often. Protecting shoves, people not in the right position. I mean, there's times where you've got to shove a mile-long train, and we didn't quite do it properly, and we'd end up having a derailment or an injury. Leaving equipment in the clear. If you remember those clearance point markers that I showed you, was another issue. And then securing equipment, making sure that when we left equipment on your tracks, our customer tracks, or in a rail yard, that all the handbrakes were tied properly, and that equipment wasn't going to move or roll and harm anybody. Okay, a couple more here. We can get to some questions. The last couple things here is we have a whole nother group called OPTAC, and I just wanted you to know that we have a 24/7 group, different than the OPCC. I call them Big Brother, and we look at trains real time. We have inward and outward cameras on all of our through freight locomotives, and this group can now look in the cab of the locomotive, talk to the crew, look out the front, as you can see here in the more black and white picture on the bottom right. They can see exactly what this crew's doing and address any safety concerns. This is new stuff, maybe a year and a half old. The actual testing of it's right at about a year old. Okay, some takeaways. Railroad industry is safer than it has ever been. It's just a fact. The Union Pacific posted records in derailment and injury reduction. New technology is leading the way in derailment reduction. The Union Pacific is keeping its employees safer than ever, and we are sparing no expense on hardening our infrastructure. And I don't know if I shared this earlier, but I think we spend more money on our infrastructure than every city in this country but 4. And I need to fact check myself, but I think that's correct. And that's all I have for you today. I'm open up for questions, Jess.
Well, Dave, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. We had over 80 members participating on here, so I will just kick it off right now. If there, as Catherine was saying, if there's any specific questions for David, please put them here in the chat box. But I will just, my question to you is what's the number one cause of human factor derailments?
That's a great question. I was at the FRA Rail Share in Florida here at the end of last year. So this is Amit Bose, the administrator of the FRA at the time there, spoke. We had people from all over the globe there. Carl Alexi, I mean, the biggest names. There were 800 people, I believe, that at the Rail Share. All of us trying to solve one problem: fatalities and injuries in the rail industry and derailments. And by and large, the number one cause of human factor derailments is the failure to properly protect that shove. If we can solve for that, we'll have a almost derailment-free industry. But for whatever reason, we don't do a good job of getting. How about the employee doesn't do a good job of getting in a position to see that shove when a train needs to go in reverse. For those of you who don't know, spot your customer facility, your grain elevators. They need to be in a position where they can see the point of that shove all the way to where it's going to stop every time. Good question.
Right. All right. I have another one for you. I don't see any others that are on here, but I have another question for you. What does technically hold in store? What does technically, I'm sorry, what does technically hold in store for the rail industry regarding safety?
Okay. I would say technology will lead the way. We talked a lot about physics train builder. I I've been working on some technology where a drone will launch from a perched position in a rail yard. It will scan that rail yard and be able to send and use AI and send back information to the management in the area. If a car is left out to foul, so over that clearance mark, it'll immediately take a picture of that location and send it to a manager so they can address it before someone gets in trouble, hurt, or have a collision. It can tell us if it sees an employee going between equipment that's too close together. It can inspect track, looking for defects. So all those things we talked about before, these drones can fly along the rail and do better than the naked eye ever would at looking for defects. So I'd say technology is probably what'll take us to the next level.
And just to follow up on the technology too, it's very interesting how it all applies because there's the technology that you can use as a company as well, but there's also technology from the agencies that oversee you. And I know it's a little for those on here that are from primarily fall under OSHA jurisdiction. I know it's a little bit different from for the rail industry because you fall under jurisdiction of multiple agencies, FRA and OSHA, correct?
Yes, yes. As far as the train operations go, all FRA. The OSHA portion is for our facilities, fall protection and things of that nature.
Great. And then, so that I think that's a good segue into the next question between the jurisdiction with FRA and OSHA. So how does FRA work with the rail industry in the name of safety?
I don't think a lot of people realize that the Federal Railroad Administration has thousands of regulations that tell us every step we take. Mother may I. It's unbelievable. When we talk about the shoving, right? That's a rule 6.5 in our book, but that whole shove is a regulation. The federal government tells us and our employees exactly how they are supposed to protect a shove. Cars left out to foul with those clearance points that I showed you. That's a regulation. The switch is being lined properly. That's a regulation. There's really no part of our work that isn't regulated by the federal government. And they have inspectors all over the nation, multiple per state. They come out like highway patrolmen and they assess our train crews. And if they see egregious activity, they write us a fine. Those switches that we throw come with switch hooks, right? They look like a little shepherd's hook. And anytime you throw a switch, you got to put it back in. It's pretty simple activity. Doesn't seem like much. But you know, if we leave one of those out and we have 1 million switches on our railroad, it's $15,000 fine. So, and everything we do is fineable. So they keep us in check and they make sure we're doing what we say we're going to do. But a lot of people don't realize that most of the stuff I just talked to you about today is under federal regulation.
Yeah, and I know that's a very interesting how this all ties into back to the technology part of it too, right? And it's very interesting because I know there's been discussion about the need for the FRA to embrace automation and technology, particularly through the inspection process that enhances safety and efficiency for customers, correct? I think there's been a lot of discussion about that within your industry.
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, I'll be in Washington here in a couple of weeks at the DOT and hopefully meeting the new administrator. And we're going to go over some of this stuff that we've really got right here in our pocket, ready to go, ready to pull the trigger on it. That wasn't quite as accepted in the previous administration that we hope will be now. And we can implement this stuff and make a safer railroad for everybody.
What would be an example of like AI safety or any of the other types of automated safety? Is there an example?
Yeah, a lot of train handling stuff. I think would be the biggest RCO type things, automation with RCO, automation with locomotives. The safest way, the best way to keep anyone from getting hurt is not to have anyone on the train to begin with, right? Or in harm's way. Pulling pins, which would separate equipment. And we have technology to do that already. how we switch cars. So there's a lot of that type of stuff that takes the person, still involves a person, but takes them out of harm's way, keeps them on the side, if you will, on the right of way instead of the gauge of that rail.
So final question here for you. So just when it comes to grain handling facilities, right? There's been a lot of talk. You've obviously your knowledge, expertise, your day-to-day, your everyday job working on the grain operation or working on the rail operations. But when it comes to grain handling facilities, what types of training do you have, do you provide for your staff when they're working with those facilities?
That's another good question. We don't carve out just the grain, but what we do is spend all of our new hires go through very regimented training with how to spot any customer. And most customers are similar, right? We're going to come off the main line. We're going to make sure we lower that fixed derail so we don't have an incident. We're going to ensure that before we couple into any equipment at that facility or grain in this case, that we're going to walk around that equipment and make sure that there's no hoses tied to it, nobody's on the equipment, and it is safe to do so. We make sure that if there are spur tracks or stub tracks, right, tracks that just end into a pile of dirt or bumping posts, we have very specific rules, and we test every one of our crews for this, where they have to stop 150 feet short of that bumping post or into the track. They have to tie a handbrake on that car so they're shoving against a brake to ensure they don't go off the end. So although it's not so specific to grain, we do spend a ton of time, I will say the majority of the time, ensuring that those types of activities for spotting customers are safe. Now, when it comes to the mainline portion of handling grain cars, unit grain trains are the easiest of the bunch. I think the only thing, empty unit grain trains, empty unit coal trains, very easy for our locomotive engineers to run. The buff and draft, the pictures I showed you earlier, they just don't exist in those trains. There's not much slack in the drawbar and the knuckle there to where an engineer can have an issue with buff forces and run in and so on. Not that it's impossible and doesn't happen, but it's on the lower end of our skill level need, and those trains typically don't have a lot of issues on the main line.
Great. Well, I think there's one final question for you here. How many total derails happen per year? I've noticed this has been a couple of people have asked that question.
So there's two types of derailments. There's FRA reportable derailments, and that's what I showed you on the screen before, right? So, you know, those average around 60 a year now, right? Now that we're good. But we also have those one wheel. So what is an FRA reportable derailment, which is what I showed you here? These are the ones the FRA care about. Why? Because there was some other involvement or it was expensive. In other words, for the FRA, if the derailment did not result in over $12,400 worth of damage, it's not FRA report. So if you know what inflation is, you realize we can't hardly do anything. We can't hardly have a derailment with it not costing $12,400. But from time to time, we'll put one wheel on the ground, right? You have a little switch out of a line, you put a wheel on the ground. Think of that as having a flat tire, right? Or something along those lines with your car. It's not a major accident, it's an inconvenience. And those, you know, we'll have 100 of those a year or more. But the big ones, right? The ones that jeopardize life or limb, have issues with evacuations or a risk of hazardous material. We have got those down to a record low somewhere around the 60s.
Great. Well, if they don't, let's see, there's I guess here's a question, well, a couple more questions here that are popping up in the limited time we have. So I see there I think there's a first here a question regarding I would say fatigue, as far as the work schedule for employees, to make sure there's a balance with work and sleep. And another question here, should grain transfer stations have deraillers?
Okay, so let's answer fatigue first.
Yep.
Earlier I said that everything's regulated, even fatigue. So right now, we can only work our train crews 12 hours. And I won't go too deep into it, but not only can you only work them 12 hours, but if you work them so many hours and so many days, they get more days off. They regulate all that. Not only that, but they just had a whole nother regulation on just fatigue itself that says that we will have and we do now, that we will have a plan for those who feel like they've come to work fatigued. As a matter of fact, there'll be an app rolled out where an employee shows up, they feel fatigued, they answer these questions, and it tells them based on their answers what they should do next, right? Very little fatigue, it might tell them, hey, go get a cup of coffee, get some fresh air. A lot of fatigue, go talk to your manager. We don't want you on the train today. So believe it or not, that's a requirement of the Federal Railroad Administration. Should derailers be at transfer locations? So my definition of a transfer location, somebody else's definition of transfer. If a transfer location is basically a track where we're going to bring in an entire train and drop it off, a unit train, from that, if that is the customer's track or another railroad's track, it is going to have a derail between Union Pacific and them. It's called the Sealed Corridor Initiative. That started a decade ago, but there should be no way that a Union Pacific train can access a facility or a facility can access Union Pacific's main line without encountering a derail. And if you have a location that's not like that, I need to know about it.
Well, David,
Let Jess know and he'll tell me.
yeah. Well, I know the questions keep popping up here, even though I know we're really limited in time, and I don't know if you have. I want to make sure that we can get these questions addressed for all the participants that are on here, and I just want to make sure you have time too, David, or do you have?
All yours. Let me take a drink of water and shoot
Take
away.
a drink of water here, and I'll get to these last two questions. I promise. I keep saying that with our finals, but they keep popping up, which is great. So there's when cars get dropped off, what would be the law for unload time? So I guess there's a question: is there any type of regulation standard for the time it takes to unload once a car is dropped off?
There is not.
I didn't think so, but that's why I wanted to double check, because I know at grain handling facilities, I know that's always an issue as far as time and delivery goes, but I'm not gonna get into that. And then, are there any regulations, rules, standards for blocking roadways for a certain amount of time?
Boy, is there. So about 4 years ago, our CEO came to my office and said, David, I need some help with the block crossings. And in all fairness, probably was a little bit out of control. I have a whole nother presentation on that I take to Washington, D.C. But here, this is what I'll tell you as quickly as I can. Used to be a huge problem, a lot better now. I can't speak for the other railroads, but we put on a team of people just for block crossings. Part of my job now is a little high level, but because I manage those folks. But every morning when I get here at 5:45 a.m., one of the first screens that pop up for me is the block crossing heat map. And it tells me immediately, I can get a picture of the United States, and it is going to tell me in a heat chart where I've had block crossing complaints. And then it's going to tell me the phone number of the person that called, the DOT of that crossing, and how many times it's been blocked, and so on. I'll have a member of my team go find out what the heck is going on, right? Do we have a track project going on, which is making trains move through there slowly? Do we change the T plan? And I will try and adjust that so that those crossings aren't blocked anymore. So that's pretty basic. But what's cool is using technology, we now have the ability to tell you if a train is stopped and blocking a crossing anywhere on our network. And I use what's called PTC data that's sent out from all the locomotives on trains. And because I know their length, etc., I can get an alert if a train stops on a particular crossing. We use that right now for firefighters and first responders. So anywhere where we know that first responders and firefighters are going to need quick access on a regular basis, right? They come out of the fire station, the first thing they need to do is go across to Elm Street. I'll even get the alert if there's a train on that crossing. So this is still pretty much in its infancy, this part of it. We hope to grow that to where it's not just first responders, but it's a nationwide, we hope other railroads adopt it so that we can reduce block crossings at all.
Well, great. Well, thank you, David, very much. That was an excellent presentation. A lot of good discussion, questions from the participants, and I want to thank again everybody for all of our partners that I mentioned earlier for their support, and thank all of you for participating in the initial poll. There's still time to register for the other sessions at standupforgrainsafety.org. You can receive two certificates for today. I know we had two separate presentations. So to receive a certificate of attendance for today's session, you can download the PDF in the chat box. I know that Catherine has posted several links here. And to receive your stand-up participation certificate from OSHA, go to the stand-up website and recognize your participation tab. Here you can share how you plan to celebrate the Stand Up for Grain Safety Week, and after submitting your ideas, you will receive a certificate that you can use for yourself and other employees who will participate in the Stand Up initiatives. Again, check out the link so we can understand how the event will make an impact on the industry. Please remember to take the very quick survey that will pop up in your browser when you exit Zoom. This concludes our formal session, and we will move directly to Ask the Expert. So I'm not sure, is there an expert that we have in here? I think, David, you're a pretty good expert.
Yeah. We're just gonna allow people to unmute themselves,
Okay.
and if they want to ask David a question
Okay.
directly, we'll give it a couple minutes. Plus, people can scroll through the chat, download the resources. Put some resources from NGFA in the chat. I would, recommend you downloading them if you don't have them already. They're great resources. As well as your certificate and anything else that you want to grab from the chat box. So we'll give you a couple minutes to do that and a few more minutes to ask questions.
So I think the one that's popped up here. So where are people supposed to report the blockage?
Oh, great question. Every one of our crossings should have a little DOT number on it and the actual phone number for RMCC. We audit that quite regularly. I'll be shocked if you can find a road crossing in the Union Pacific that doesn't have that little sign in advance to every railroad crossing with RMCC's number and the DOT number so that you can properly report it.
Great. Okay. Any other questions for David? Well, if there aren't any other questions, once again, appreciate everyone's time for taking the time to participate today and for standing up for grain safety. Stay safe, and we're going to end the Zoom presentation for now.